Let me start by saying that having attended two sessions and seeing the quality of discussions, the amount of interest, uh, I'm really delighted to be here. And let me thank all those strategic thinkers, the thought trenders, if I may say, business leaders, and media persons from our extended neighborhood, major economies, the G20 countries who have participated in this first edition of the Gateway of India Dialogue held on the last 2 days. And let me compliment both the Gateway House and the Ministry of External Affairs for putting it together and all of you for attending it. Please give a big hand to all of you. We started with a series in terms of geopolitical issues which were partnered between the MEA and the ORF as part of Raisina Dialogues in Delhi. And this is the second edition in which we picked up on geo-economic issues. And there is no other city more suitable than the economic hub of this country, Mumbai, to hold this. And to that extent, Gateway House became our able partner in holding this session. If we look at the theme, where geopolitics meets business, I don't think we could have had a more apt theme than this, where we could discuss issues, where we could leave for people various questions, various thoughts, which will generate further discussions and further dialogues between all those who have attended this. From times immemorial, economics has been the mainstay which has affected the foreign policy of any country. And it has been so. You take any time in the history, it has always been the economic interests which shape the foreign policies, which allow countries to interact with each other in a particular way, whether they give or they take, or the policies are extractive or they are inclusive or they are mutually beneficial. It all gets shaped with the type of economic interest that you have. And therefore, the importance of these last 2 days in which we have debated various issues from one end of the spectrum to the another end of spectrum. Now, I have been asked to give my thoughts on India's global engagement strategy, greater energy, growing aspirations. And let me endeavor to provide some thoughts on this, some thoughts on what is the direction that the foreign policy in India is taking, how does it affect various interests that emanate from it. Any country which embarks on any aspirational foreign policy or its objectives needs to look at its internal situation first. And that's why let me just put a broad perspective of what the internal dynamics are and how things are looking, which is what is allowing us to adopt a particular methodology that we are practicing. Last month, this government of ours completed 2 years. And when it came in 2014, it came with an absolute majority which has not happened in 3 decades in this country. For the first time, we had a government that was in majority, and we had a leadership that was willing to take decisions and take this country forward. And this happened because there were a lot of aspirations and hope within the population that they wanted a change, they wanted good governance, they wanted a government that works and provides this good governance, and they wanted a government that takes care of the country. And what has these last 2 years given us? The, if we look at how our GDP growth has been, if we look at what the country did when we embarked 2 years back, one of the things that was decided very clearly was that it is economics that will make a difference. And we don't have to go very far. I mean, you look at any country which has tried to prosper or tried to increase its influence, it is always focused on economy. And therefore, we launched great amount of emphasis on infrastructure development, which included road, rail, shipping, anything that you say. There was a great emphasis provided to manufacturing sector. There was great emphasis provided to things that matter in the lives, whether it is the energy sector, whether it is the electricity, whether it is the mining sector, whether it is telecommunications. All these were picked up as areas of priority. And therefore, they became contributors of the growth and the type of leverage it has given India. Because when your own manufacturing is happening, when you are able to work the money that you have in a particular manner, then you also create an environment for rest of the world to come and invest in a country that they can trust. And the trust emanates from the way things are moving in the country. If there are positive signs, an investor will invest. If there are negative signs, investor will not invest. And today, when we have the highest FDI, which has been our basket that we have, it is because there is a great amount of trust in the world market that they can come and invest in India, and those will be safe investments. Now that has made a great amount of difference where India is concerned in terms of how our economy is growing. Today, if we look in the world, India is a bright spot. Reason being that our GDP is growing much faster than what the others are doing. When the rest of the economies are actually going down or shrinking, Indian economy is growing, primarily because of the type of policies and environment that has been created. Now this has been a great contributor to how we are able to invest money from abroad in infrastructure, in various other flagship programs, and channelize them in a manner in which it benefits the country. There are countries which are primarily investing because they have confidence on the Prime Minister and the government of this Prime Minister. Now that's a very positive sign. Let me share with you, when the Japanese Prime Minister came to India on his visit last year, he said to our Prime Minister that, Mr. Prime Minister, Japan has confidence in you, and that is why we want to invest. It's a different situation. It is a situation created by how a projection has been made in terms of the leader of this country trying to put this country on a different pedestal altogether. Now this is what is going to make a difference. Along with the boom the economy is seeing, we also have the advantage of the demographic trend, at least for the next 2 decades. The type of age group of population that we have and the type of policies that we have launched. When I say age group of the youth, if you do not harness this youth properly, it will not be an advantage. It will be a disadvantage. But if you can harness this youth power in a productive manner, then the country benefits. Now, how do you do that? For a very long time in our country, we talked of unemployment, and we talked of the rates of unemployment. We said, how are we going to meet it? And the traditional methodology was, let's create jobs. Now, how do you create jobs unendlessly in a government department. So a different strategy has been adopted, and the strategy is that you create skill sets, you teach these skill sets to people, you ensure that finance is available so that people can learn the skill sets and find a job for themselves or create a job for themselves. It is a different approach. It gives employment to people, it boosts the economy, and it allows for a more inclusive development that can take place in the country. Same has been our thrust accordingly in our foreign policy. Our foreign policy has gone out of that zero-sum game which at some period of time a lot of countries have practiced. Today, India can hold friendship and talks and business with Saudi Arabia, and so in the similar terms it can do with Iran. It can talk to US on mutually beneficial terms. It can do the same with Russia and China. It has broken out of the molds that had been created earlier. And that has been the main success of the way the world sees India today. It is economic clout coupled with the potential that we harbor and our ability to reach out in a manner in which it is bilateral understanding that is being forged, and which is what is making difference. Distinguished guests, it is in the last 24 months that most of the people who are looking at India or studying India agree that the quality of our diplomatic engagement has become totally different. If I was to tell you that between the President, the Prime Minister, the External Affairs Minister, and me, we have already touched 140 countries in this world. You won't believe it. There are another 60 odd left, and let me tell you, by end of the year, we would have touched each and every country in the world. We are not looking at how small a country is or how big a country is. We are reaching out to everybody for the simple reason that we think that everybody has a place, everybody can mutually benefit with engagement with us, and everybody's own expertise can be made use by us in a manner in which it will benefit them and us both. And that is a difference in our diplomatic engagement that has taken place today. You are witness to the way our Prime Minister was received in the various countries recently. I don't think you would find any other Prime Minister who will visit 5 countries in 6 days and still not get jet lagged. And that has been a trend. We are focusing on things which will make a difference. And that is what is ensuring the trust that the world community is exhibiting in trying to come and invest in India and ensure that economically we are able to prosper. Now, our approach also has been to look at entire region and engage countries within this as part of this region and not just leave them as a region itself. And therefore, whether it was our engagement with Africa, in which we called all the heads of states from Africa in the India-Africa Forum Summit, 3rd series, which was held in Delhi last year, or it is in the way our Prime Minister did a whirlwind tour of various countries in the Central Asian republics, or now in a different manner, or the way our President is now doing it. He is already in Africa at the moment. The way we have looked at the Indian Ocean region countries, the way we have looked at the Pacific Island countries, there is a lot that they trust in India because they feel that we can give them a lot. And I'll just give you one example. A country of 1.25 billion, if it starts looking at clean energy and if it starts reducing the carbon footprint, it is going to make a difference to most of the island countries. And they all have this trust that if a country of such a large population can do it, the others will follow this example, which is what is going to contribute towards climate change principles and the agenda that has been adopted. So that is the type of our diplomatic engagement initiative and reaching out that is taking place with various countries in the world. We feel that our foreign policy must focus on our neighborhood. If the neighborhood is prosperous, if the neighborhood is friendly, it will mutually benefit everybody. And that's why we have maintained very close relations. We have made great amount of effort in our neighborhood to ensure that our relationships become better. There have been issues in our neighborhood which have lingered on for a very long time. And I'll only talk of one where for almost 40 years or more, the land border settlement with Bangladesh did not take place. It took place last year with both houses of the parliament voting unanimously to endorse that decision. And it has made a difference between the relationship between Bangladesh and India. There is a much greater trust that exists between both the countries, which is resulting in not only trade and commerce, it is resulting in better people-to-people contacts, it is resulting in better opportunities on both the sides of the border for business, it is resulting in mutual sharing of resources in which we are selling power today to Bangladesh. So our approach basically has been consultative, non-reciprocal, outcome-oriented, and it is tied to our security interests in ensuring that we create a better environment in our neighborhood. We are doing the same with each and every neighbor of ours. We are also ensuring that we are doing things within the frameworks that we have created. For example, SAARC. But that is not a binding. If we find that it is not happening within this ambit of SAARC, we are going out individually to do things. For example, the Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Nepal arrangement that has been done, BBIN, where we have said, okay, we can do trade between these countries and put structures in place which will benefit these countries. So we are ensuring that neighborhood remains a priority. We are ensuring that our neighbors feel secure. We are ensuring that our neighbors trust us so that we can all go on the path of prosperity together. Our relationship, if you look at the bigger parts, has gone a drastic change. And the recent visit of the Prime Minister to US signifies it. The way there is a greater understanding, the way there is a better, not only understanding, but a better desire to do business with India, which has happened now, it has never happened before. And this is the trend with all other countries, whether it is Russia, with which we have had historical strategic interests, whether it is with China, where we have reached out so that we can have more business and investment on mutually acceptable areas. We are ensuring that wherever there is an opportunity, it must be made use of. All old ghosts that exist are closed and locked up, and they do not come out of the cupboard to unnecessarily affect the policies which will benefit the country. Our Act East policy, which we used to say earlier as Look East, has been energized so that we can create better connectivity onto our east, so that it enhances the trade, commerce, cultural and religious links that we have with this area. And we feel that this is going to then result in a greater prosperity for not only India, but for the entire eastern region beyond our borders. When we look at Europe, accordingly, we have made our policies which ensure that various countries in Europe with which we can gain or they can gain from us are given requisite priority. And therefore, you would see that as part of the visits that have been planned, visits have gone to areas where at some point of time, because of various reasons, people have not been able to visit at a higher leadership level to those countries for a very long time. The Prime Minister visited Ireland almost after 30 years or more. So our aim has been that we need to reach out to all areas of the globe, because each area has its own strength, each country has its own strength, each country, if trusted, or if they trust us, it can result in mutually beneficial solutions for both of us. We have shown commitment for creating shared stakes in security and prosperity in our immediate periphery by demonstrating our readiness to tackle difficult issues like the land and maritime boundary problems. Our efforts among the Indian Ocean littoral states to build security networks through collaboration on coastal surveillance, sharing of white shipping information, and cooperation in fighting non-traditional threats like piracy, smuggling, organized crime as part of our strategy. We are also looking at our energy security needs. We saw the panel discussion in a manner in which the needs of energy security are met by diversification to various countries, and they don't remain confined to one particular area. We have also demonstrated our willingness and ability to step up to the task of being a provider of security. When I say security, it basically is on humanitarian assistance and disaster relief that we have practiced with great finesse. You are aware of the way we went to Nepal. You are aware of recently when there were floods in Sri Lanka and the landslides, we assisted them. You are aware of our assistance to Maldives when there was a water crisis. We have shown our willingness to reach out into our neighborhood or anywhere beyond to provide what we have to show the type of friendship that exists. We have also demonstrated to our people that the country will come to their rescue in difficult times, and to that we have also added a little fine print that with our countrymen, with our nationals, if there are other nationalities also who are stuck up, we would assist them. And you are aware of the way we have rescued our people from Iraq, Libya, Yemen particularly, from where almost 24 different nationalities were also evacuated, and we had a good word being conveyed to us from those countries. We feel that any country which wants to make a place in the world must act responsible, must go by the rules that the world has framed for, or the world bodies have framed in a manner in which we can ensure that international conduct is properly governed. And therefore, we are in favor of freedom of navigation and peaceful resolution of disputes in the Indo-Pacific theater. For example, we have always said that it is UNCLOS which must be taken note of, and we have supported the world effort on this particular regime. We have also ensured that we assist wherever international obligations do so. And that is why we still continue to provide very large number of troops for peacekeeping operations to the UN. Ladies and gentlemen, you will agree that the most important threat which is confronting us today and which we discussed in the panel which just happened before this is terrorism from across the borders. Our efforts at building an international consensus in fighting terrorism and extremism are a work in progress. Terrorism is a disruptor of stability and progress and mars any economic activity that thrives. And therefore, we want to ensure that it is these terror groups which are checked, it is terrorism which is sponsored by states is brought down, and we are ready and willing to partner with anybody who would like to see this particular viewpoint of ours. We have been progressing with the comprehensive Convention on International Terrorism, which is in the UN. We have been saying that all countries must adhere to it so that there is an international check on state-sponsored terrorism and acts of terrorism. If we are not able to convey this message correctly, in simple language, there are states which do not understand that if you are riding a tiger, one day the tiger is going to devour you. We have been telling the world that there are no good and bad terrorists, there are only terrorists. This distinction does not exist. The terrorists will morph into something at a particular period of time. And the way things are going, it is a matter of concern. If we look at way some of them have morphed into states themselves, Daesh or ISIS has been doing it primarily because they feel that if they have to declare a caliph who can get support from rest of the population of the religion, then they must have land. So they have land, they've declared it as their territory, they've got a caliph, they've got money, they've got a very well-oiled, sophisticated propaganda machinery, which is what is getting them recruits. And today, the way they are able to make inroads into various places is something which the world needs to be concerned at, and that is what we have been saying to rest of the people, that we need to seriously take note of this threat so that we are able to put checks in place which will ensure that world becomes a better place. Now, a word about the emphasis on economic diplomacy. The Foreign Secretary spoke about it in his address yesterday, at the inaugural address. So let me just say in brief that projecting India's economic interests has acquired a new profile in the last 2 years. We are putting a great amount of emphasis on economic activity as part of our foreign policy. We are ensuring that we are able to create deliverables as part of our foreign policy where they should be able, our diplomats should be able to ensure that the economic interests of the country are served as well, if not better, than as part of the diplomatic package that they have. We are also ensuring that what domestic growth opportunities which are available are properly advertised to rest of the world so that the world is able to come and invest in it, and make use of it. And that is why there have been large number of flagship programs of the Government of India which are ensuring that these can be subscribed accordingly. Related to this is also a desire that in a federal structure country like ours, the states get equal importance. And therefore, we created a states division within the Ministry of External Affairs, which progresses interests of the states with the rest of the countries outside in the world. Because each state has its own strength. Earlier, this was a great difficulty, and I think this was the experience that our Prime Minister, having come from a very progressive state of Gujarat, found it when he was Chief Minister. He shared it when he became Prime Minister. So there is a state division to progress the interests of the state and making it easy for them to interact with the rest of the world so that they can come and make use of opportunities that exist in that state. This is a very positive development that has taken place as part of our diplomatic initiatives. One other area that needs to be noted and which I need to talk about is something which concerns my own background, and that is defense diplomacy. It is defense part of our initiatives to ensure that we have indigenous manufacturing in the country. India, you know, has been a very large importer of arms for a fair amount of time. We have been making efforts to ensure that there is a greater amount of indigenous production. And towards that end, policies have been so shaped, policies have been created so that they become more lucrative for anybody who wants to come and do business in India. Now, there are two caveats in this. The first caveat is that what any country which wants to ensure that there is a defense production which is indigenous in the country is that it is looking for technology. It is not looking for licensed production. It is looking at technology and how that technology can be absorbed by the country so that the indigenous manufacture becomes truly fruitful. And the second is, how does it enhance the capability that exists in the country of both the public and the private sector, which can assist in this particular role. My own personal view is that licensed production, which we have done for a longer period of time, needs to be looked at totally differently. Maybe it is joint ventures that will give us a better answer. It is not a 49% FDI where the person who invests is not very keen to part with the technology that he has. But if you have a joint venture and the venture is geared to not only manufacture but to also provide avenues for the main company to export that somewhere, that should take place. Otherwise, you will find that it will end up in the same mode in which some of the manufacturing that took place in India. We need to also leverage some of the strengths of our public sector undertaking in this. I strongly believe that the appetite for loss is never in private sector. The private sector is geared for making profits. However, public sector undertakings at times are created so that they can bear the loss. Now that's a thing which we need to understand, because if, especially in defense equipment, where the demands are finite, if you require 1,000 tanks, you require 1,000 tanks. You don't require 1,001. If you require 100 aircraft, you require 100 aircraft. You can't keep having aircraft after another. Now, if this requirement is finite, what do? Do you come to a stop after you have made 100? So, will the private sector stop? How can it stop? It has invested so much in putting up a plant. Now, this is a dilemma. And therefore, answers have to be found for this before the private sector rushes headlong into it, and we'll end up in the same situation in which you get a knockdown kit and you assemble it in India and say it is indigenous. It's not indigenous. Till the time you don't get technology, it is not indigenous. And that is something which I'll leave as a thought for you all. There are number of countries that are interested in pursuing a model where they're able to come and set up joint ventures which will be able to progress on the mode that I said earlier. Moving on to some other issues which I think have also become part of Indian foreign policy initiatives. It is the projection of Indian culture and Indian philosophy that is also forming part of the way we are reaching out to the world. There is a lot that is available as part of our cultural heritage, as part of our composite culture that exists in this country, as part of our languages, as part of our ancient sciences, as part of our practices, which the world can benefit from. A case in point is how International Day of Yoga came into being. And today, the way it was celebrated last year, I'm quite sure it will find a much greater acceptance this year, and it will be celebrated in a much bigger way. And not because it is one day, but because it is going to benefit body and mind, and it will be something that will assist a large number of people in the world in benefiting from the type of things or type of benefits that it gives. We have also focused on Indian Buddhist heritage. You are aware that Buddhism, although not very prevalent in India, emanated from India and went out to all other countries. And we have a great amount of heritage which is now being nourished and being brought up at a level where people can come and enjoy the Buddhist heritage circuit that has been created, especially for people who practice this religion into our eastern neighbors. We are also reaching out to Persian Gulf and Africa via the type of cultural links that we have had in the earlier times. In earlier times, as part of the spice route, we were connected to both Africa and to the Middle East in a very big manner. And that is something that we are trying to give it to people back in a manner that we are able to forge those old links back and create that common heritage which can be made use of in furthering our relations. A lot of Indologists and Indophils have found that some of our languages like Sanskrit and Hindi have got a great meaning in terms of how they are, and we are trying to see that they both get required encouragement in rest of the world wherever people want it. We feel that as part of our efforts that we have made, we are today in a better place to be for our diplomatic engagement. We are in a better place to tell the world that here is India, which is thriving, which has got an ancient history. It has got a population that is going to give it a great advantage. Come here, invest, make use of it for rest of the developmental activities that you have. Everything is mutually beneficial. No country invests because it is only one-sided. It will always be investing if the deal is mutually beneficial, and that is what we have been conveying. And lastly, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be here amongst you, to have seen the type of discussions that you have had. I'm quite sure you will be much wiser after these, and you will have many, many thoughts after this. And we are quite sure that when we have the next session of this dialogue, it will be much more interesting than what we have this time, and much more successful than what we have had this time. I thank the organizers for this, and I thank all of you. Thank you very much. Jai Hind.
Thank you, General Singh, for a most informative and wide-ranging keynote address. May I call upon Manjeet Kriplani and Santosh Jha to deliver the vote of thanks.
Thank you. Actually, uh, maybe just one or two, but we haven't collected them. Have we collected any questions, Elvira?
I've got a couple here, so if we have time, happy
Okay.
to ask one of those. Thank
Yes.
you.
No, you can speak right there. Sure.
So do I, funnily enough. So thank you for elaborating a bit. You mentioned the recent visit of the Prime Minister to the US. And I wondered if you could tell us a bit about your view on how that fruitful meeting and those that have been just before could evolve further. What do you hope and endeavour to achieve in that very important relationship with the US?
See, relationship with the US has always been important where India is concerned, right from the time that we became independent. Even before we became independent, the support of US was always very helpful in the way things moved. I won't say that what is happening now is making a totally different paradigm. What is happening now certainly is an awakening of the relationships which should have probably awakened much earlier. Today there is a better understanding. Today there is a better understanding of how India is moving and how the US, the oldest democracy, can combine with the largest democracy in making this world a better place.
Thank you. Do we have time for one more? Just one. Very quickly then, one of the things that we're all wondering about now that the polls are on the knife's edge in the UK for Brexit is simply, of course, what the outcome would be. And in your opinion, would the EU, if the UK were to exit, see greater coherence or disintegration?
I'll be as positive as some of the people in the government of UK that I have met. Brexit is not succeeding. It's going to get defeated. So we'll talk about it if anything more than that happens, right? There was one thing which came up in the discussion on energy, and I just wanted to clarify that. A figure of 300 million was given as without electricity. Today, on your mobile, you can download an app by the Power Ministry, which gives the total amount that has been produced and total amount that has been utilized and total number of places that are yet to be electrified. And I'll just give you those figures. Two years back when this government came into being, there were 18,000 plus villages which were not electrified. As of now, out of this, 8,300 villages have been electrified. And like I said, if you look at this app, it is giving you progress every minute. And if you take these 18,000 plus villages, even if you take a figure of 19,000 and have a family size of 6, which is abnormal, you don't get a figure of more than 114,000 people who are without electricity, not 300 million. Today, there was 3,457 megawatts of power which were surplus at the power exchange. And the average market price today was 2 rupees and 29 paisas of this power for per unit. And the demand met yesterday was 136 gigawatts in the peak hours. We're pretty well off. And there's one sector which is doing extremely well where India is concerned. You are also aware that as part of our initiative we have set a very ambitious target for renewable energy. And with the Solar Alliance coming, we are progressing steadfastly onto that path to ensure that we have clean, renewable energy in the largest possible measure in the world. Thank you very much.
And that is a very optimistic note to end this conference on. We'd like to thank all of you. You've been here for 13 hours, starting from 8 o'clock this morning. And we appreciate your being here. Thank you to the Ministry of External Affairs. This is the first Gateway of India dialogue, and I hope we can continue this so that we can really have a meeting of geopolitics and business to the benefit of India and the rest of the world. So thank you all for coming, and this is a vote of thanks. We declare the conference closed and look forward to next year.